today over alleged links to July's failed coup. More than 100,000 people have now lost their jobs in the aftermath of the coup attempt. This critics say would controversial bill that critics say would legitimize child marriage. The proposed law had provoked public outrage and demonstrations that resulted in clashes with police. Now, the bill would have allowed child sex offenders to escape imprisonment if they married their victims. The Prime Minister said an all-party commission would now review the proposal. Our correspondent Dorian Jones is following all the latest developments for us from Istanbul and joins us for more. Hi, Dorian. Good to see you. Let's start with the sackings of 15,000 one day, more than 100,000 since the failed coup attempt. Does the government still really maintain that all of these people had links to that failed coup? And do you believe him?
Well, under the decree that dismissed these people, they say it is not because they were linked directly to the coup, but they had links to a terror organization that was linked to the coup. Now, that is basically all these people are accused of being followers of the Islamic cleric Fethullah Gulen, who lives in self-imposed exile in the United States. Ankara says he was the mastermind behind this coup, and his network of followers are the ones who carried it out. Now the government is involved in a purge of all of the state's institutions of followers of Gulen. And he is believed to have as many as 1 million, possibly 2 million followers within the country, many of whom are believed to work within the state. So this ongoing purge shows no signs of ending. Further waves of suspensions and arrests are expected to follow. And the government have said this as their interrogations go on. They say more names are revealed and their investigations will lead to more people being suspended and arrested for the foreseeable future.
Dorian, I want to move to the other big story in Turkey today. That is this child marriage bill that has been withdrawn. How big of a setback really is this for the government?
Well, it certainly is a setback for the Prime Minister. Him and his ministers have been steadfast behind this very controversial legislation for the last week or so. But it took the intervention of the President yesterday. He said that there needs to be a broad consensus for this legislation. He recognized a large-scale nationwide protest. And I think there was a fear within the government and certainly within the presidency, given the social tensions within the country, that such nationwide protests could easily spiral out of control and could ultimately even threaten the government and the president. And they are deeply concerned about that risk. This is why I think the legislation has been withdrawn. It will be a humiliation for the Prime Minister, but I think that they were very keen to avoid any further protests.
And just briefly, Dorian, do you think international condemnation of this bill played a role?
I think it's more to do with the domestic than the international. The government seems increasingly to ignore international protests. They're facing it nearly on a daily basis, and they said that the Turkey will go its own way. What they are worried about is the risk of social tensions and social unrest, and I think that is why we saw the withdrawal of this legislation, even though the government had the votes in Parliament to easily pass it.
Our correspondent Dorian Jones for us in Istanbul. Dorian, thank you very much for that update. Well, the EU Parliament, meanwhile, is discussing its relations to Turkey today. Arne Lietz is a German member of the European Parliament. He joins us for more on that story. Mr. Lietz, thank you very much for being with us today. I want to ask you, first of all, you were in Turkey yesterday and you wanted to visit a member of the opposition in prison, if I understand correctly, but it wasn't possible. What happened?
That is correct. Thank you for having me here from the European Parliament, from Strasbourg. We tried as a group of European politicians from the Social Democratic Party family to visit the co-leader of the HDP, Mr. Demirtas, who is imprisoned. And as we tried to drive towards the prison, a few hundred meters before, there was a police car and policemen went out with armed policemen stopping us driving further, so we couldn't even reach the prison. And so as we didn't, we gave a press conference showing solidarity to the imprisoned parliamentarians of the HDP, but also of the mayors of over 28 cities in the Kurdish region who have been in this situation, now being taken out of office, being in prison, most of them, and the government took control on this region in the town halls.
Now, the media has also been seen as a target of this government, and you also went to meet with journalists from the newspaper Cumhuriyet. Were you able to?
That is absolutely correct. We met some people from the Cumhuriyet news agency. We went to their office and heard that there is a big threat. The government tries to push to make it difficult to exist. They're trying to force and set new legal situations against Cumhuriyet. But besides that, we talked also to some members of the family, and over 12 journalists have been imprisoned a few days ago. And so we also showed solidarity there. What was interesting, we also met people from our sister party, CHP. Few of them have supported the uplifting of immunity of parliamentarians, and now we have the result already a few months afterwards. I was there in May in the Turkish parliament, and now the HDP people are imprisoned. But what is new to the CHP also, that some of them have already legal they get sued by the government already, and even they tried to have a demonstration with the labor movement, and they were called to be here in the terrorism arena, that they support terrorism just by demonstrating. And so we see that the government pushes harder and harder against opposition parties across even parliamentarians which are still in parliament.
All right, Arne Lietz, a German member of the European Parliament, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you as well.
Moving on to some other news now. President-elect Donald Trump says he'll pull the U.S. out of a planned free trade deal with countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Now, his pledge came in a video posted on Twitter in which he unveiled several key policies he said he would introduce in his very first day in office. And Christoph Kober of our business desk is here to tell us more about that story.
Zumi, the Trans-Pacific trade deal has been a key priority for the Obama administration. It would create a free market among 12 countries of the Pacific Rim, which account for 40% of the world economy. But Donald Trump apparently won't have it.
I am going to issue our notification of intent to withdraw from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a potential disaster for our country. Instead, we will negotiate fair bilateral trade deals that bring jobs and industry back onto American shores.
Critics have said that a U.S. withdrawal from TPP would strengthen China. After all, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is all about bolstering trade between the U.S. and China's competitors. Trump also talked about changes to energy policy, pledging to boost coal and oil production.
I will cancel job-killing restrictions on the production of American energy, including shale energy and clean coal, creating many millions of high-paying jobs. That's what we want. That's what we've been waiting for.
More oil, gas and coal production, a nightmare for environmentalists and not necessarily a guarantee for new jobs. Critics have pointed to better growth opportunities in alternative energies. But some businesses, especially those in the financial and pharmaceutical sector, may have liked Trump's emphasis on rolling back regulation.
I will formulate a rule which says that for every one new regulation, 2 old regulations must be eliminated. So important.
Now, Donald Trump wants to cancel TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. For more, I'm joined by Linda Hong, our correspondent in Singapore. Linda, good to see you. Now, Donald Trump's first meeting with a foreign head of state was with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Now, for a moment there, it looked like he might be looking to have friendly relations with Asia. Now he wants to back out of TPP. How is that going down in Asia?
Well, let's just say that for once, the TPP has been very negotiated for a really long time, and there were a couple of reactions, as in Japan and New Zealand, for example, are already in the process of rectifying the TPP in their parliament. And Singapore is also looking at rectifying that early next year. So that is actually all the work might have actually gone down the drain for these countries who have spent nearly almost 7-8 years trying to negotiate this deal. So that's actually quite a dampener on that Donald Trump has actually announced today.
Now, indeed, Japanese Prime Minister Abe said without the United States, TPP is actually dead. Now, is there any chance the parties will get together and renegotiate to accommodate Trump's policy ideas?
Well, it's quite difficult to renegotiate that because it's taken more than 8 years during Obama's administration to actually negotiate the deal and to actually get the countries to even sign the deal for now. And now that you have to renegotiate, it's going to take at least maybe 2 years or so to even think about implementing different kind of the Trump policy ideas that could be a little bit more different than what was it like in the Obama administration. But what we could look at could be bilateral trade agreements between the U.S. and different Asian countries, but perhaps that wouldn't be more of a free trade deal like what TPP had promised.
Trump promoting these bilateral trade deals in his policies. Now, Donald Trump also sees China as an economic competitor, some say even an economic enemy. Isn't backing out of TPP actually helping China?
Well, actually, for one, this TPP trade deal could likely be seen by Donald Trump as a very much more of trade rather than on policy. So it could actually be saving jobs because some of them actually have lost jobs due to free trade deals, and that hasn't actually helped because there's no inclusive growth as what we have seen even with Brexit in Europe. So when you have a regional trading bloc as big as TPP, sometimes you have to include the more of those who are not going to benefit. And that is why perhaps Donald Trump won the US presidential election. And instead of maybe a trade war, what we could have seen is currency manipulation on the side of China. China has actually been accused of undervaluing its yuan for many, many years. And even on the other side, who is Abe, they have actually been undervaluing. So that actually could cost some of the policy or the powers to be more of a trade deal rather than a
in Singapore.
One.
Thank you very much for your insight. And that's all your business for the moment. Back to you, Sumi.
Thank you, Christoph. Let's take a look now at some stories making headlines around the world. The U.S. State Department has warned U.S. citizens to be vigilant against possible terror attacks in Europe. Its new travel warning urges Americans to be careful in Christmas markets, public transportation, and large crowds. It said it had credible information Islamists, including al-Qaeda, were planning new terror attacks. And there have been new clashes in Kiev on the 3rd anniversary of the Maidan protest that brought down the country's pro-Russian government. Vandals struck several buildings, including a Russian-owned bank. Earlier, President Petro Poroshenko praised the 2013 uprising and vowed Ukraine would never return to Moscow's orbit. You're watching DW News. Coming up next, 1 million people are living under siege in Syria. That figure from the United Nations has doubled in 6 months. Government forces continued their bombardment of rebel-held areas over the weekend. More on that coming up later in the show. Don't forget, you can always get DW News on the go. Just download our app from Google Play or from the App Store. That will give you access to all the latest news from around the world, as well as push notifications for any breaking news. And you can also use the DW app to send us your photos and your videos. Don't go away. Stay with us.
Freedom of expression, a value that always has to be defended anew. All over the world. Art of Freedom, Freedom of Art. A multimedia project about artists and their right to express their views freely. DW.com Art of Freedom. It's always about passion. And rarely about business plans. Creative entrepreneurs in the German capital. Autonomous between self-determination and self-exploitation. Passion and Profit, Berlin Creatives. Starting November 22nd in Made in Germany on DW.
Welcome back. You're watching DW News. Our top stories. A proposed child marriage law that sparked violent protests in Turkey has been withdrawn by the government. Opponents say it would have pardoned rape and jeopardized efforts to combat child marriages. And President-elect Donald Trump says he will pull the U.S. out of a planned free trade deal with Asia-Pacific countries on his first day in office. He called the pact a potential disaster for America. Now, Japan's meteorological agency has warned that there could be another big earthquake in the next few days following one that occurred earlier today. The latest quake set off a series of small tsunamis that appear to have done no major damage, and no deaths have been reported. There were fears for the Fukushima nuclear power plant, which was wrecked in the 2011 earthquake, but it suffered no further damage today.
The powerful magnitude 7.4 earthquake struck the coast of Japan's Fukushima prefecture at around 6 a.m. local time. Soon after, authorities issued a tsunami warning, predicting waves of up to 3 meters. Fishing boats evacuated local ports and headed out to sea. I experienced the big tsunami last time, so I didn't know what to expect. I'm grateful that we were able to return without any injuries and damage to the boats. Coastal residents were ordered to flee to higher ground. Speaking during a visit to Argentina, Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said his government was doing its best to ensure the safety of those affected. I ordered government officials to provide the public with accurate and timely information regarding the tsunami evacuation. I also instructed officials to grasp the extent of the damage and to do their utmost to respond to the disaster. But 3 hours later, the tsunami warning was lifted with no reports of deaths or serious injuries. Waves of up to 1 meter were observed at Fukushima. It was here in 2011 that a tsunami triggered a nuclear disaster at the Fukushima Daiichi power plant.
Let's talk to Sophie Jackman. She's a reporter with Japan's Kyodo News Network in Tokyo. Sophie, good to see you. What is the latest? Are there any reports on quake damages or injuries?
The damages have actually been pretty minimal. There's 17 people reported injured so far, and most with minor injuries. No building collapses, no road or bridge collapses, and there was a fire at a petroleum complex, but it was put out quickly with no injuries. The Japanese authorities are calling this an aftershock from the massive quake in March 2011, and they warn that there may be similar scale quakes for the next week or so, so everybody's just holding tight and staying prepared.
Yeah, Sophie, you are there in Tokyo. Give us an idea. Did you feel the earth shake?
I did, yes. I was awake at that time. The shaking wasn't strong enough to throw anything off shelves, but it did go on for more than 30 seconds. And, you know, as someone living in Tokyo, when you feel that kind of long, soft, horizontal shake, you immediately think about people living up on the coast, and you turn on the TV and see if everything's all right up there.
Sophie, one of the immediate concerns was Fukushima. The nuclear power plant was destroyed in 2011 by that tsunami. Are those reactors safe?
The reactors themselves are shut down, but they still do contain these spent fuel pools, and those have to be kept cool at all times. The Daiichi plant, which melted down in 2011, was fine this time. A few kilometers down the coast, there's another plant called Fukushima Dai-2, and that's where the cooling system in one of those spent fuel pools briefly failed for about 2 hours, and it was turned back on. There was no radiation leak, according to the operators, and the temperature of the water didn't go up very much. But obviously the Japanese public is still wary of how vulnerable these facilities can be in natural disasters, although the government is pushing to get them turned back on throughout the country.
And Sophie, we saw in our report that several thousand people along the coast, they were moved to higher ground. How well did the evacuation system work this time around?
I think it worked well. There were some traffic jams from people trying to evacuate in their cars, but this is an area with very raw memories of the disaster 5 years ago now. Local authorities there regularly do drills, and everybody's very aware now of the need to look after their neighbours, look after elderly or vulnerable people and get them evacuated too. And the instructions for getting out in a tsunami are so much clearer now. and more specific and easy to understand. So I think it went well, and Japan is a country where that kind of vigilance about earthquakes and tsunamis is always there.
All right, Sophie Jackman from Japan's Kyodo News Network, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, nearly 1 million people are living under siege in Syria. That's according to the United Nations aid chief. That number has nearly doubled in 6 months. Over the weekend, government forces continued their bombardment of rebel-held areas and allegedly used chlorine gas in an airstrike on Aleppo. The conflict in Syria broke out almost 6 years ago. It's seen more than 450,000 people killed, most of them civilians.
This amateur video appears to show Syrian civil defense personnel in action after a bombing in Douma near Damascus. They're rescuing a man from the rubble. In the past days, dozens of similar attacks have been reported across the country. Most of the victims are civilians. Conditions are especially bad in eastern Aleppo. More than 250,000 people are trapped there, cut off from the world. They don't have a working hospital anymore, and they lack access to humanitarian aid as well as food and supplies. The UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator has repeatedly drawn attention to these catastrophic conditions.
Month after month, I have reported to this Council that the level of depravity inflicted upon the Syrian people cannot sink lower, only to return the following month with hideous and with shocking disbelief. Humanitarian conditions in eastern Aleppo have gone from terrible to terrifying, and now barely survivable by human beings.
O'Brien gives Syrian government troops and Russia no small part of the blame for the current situation. The two allies are cracking down hard on the rebels who control eastern Aleppo. After a 2-week ceasefire, fighting has erupted again across most of the city.
That report from Anna-Sophie Sieben there. More on the crisis in Syria on our website, dw.com. To sports now, and German football legend Jürgen Klinsmann has been fired as coach of the U.S. soccer team. This after his squad started the final round of World Cup qualifying with successive losses. Klinsmann said his team was going through a transitional phase and earlier derided his critics, saying they didn't understand soccer or the team. Klinsmann took the U.S. to the 2013 CONCACAF Gold Cup title and the knockout round of the 2014 World Cup. But the team has since suffered from uneven play, and qualifying losses to Mexico and Costa Rica spelled the end of the coach's tenure. Something had to give, and we finally have a leader at the World Chess Championship in New York. After the opening 7 games ended in stalemate, Russian challenger Sergei Karyakin beat Magnus Carlsen of Norway in Game 8 when the reigning champ pushed too hard in search of victory. Karyakin leads by 4.5 points to 3.5 with 4 games remaining. Carlsen was furious with the defeat and stormed out without giving the obligatory post-game news conference. Well, as borders have been drawn and redrawn by conflict and anger in the Balkan states, the daily lives of people living near those borders have grown increasingly complex. Just walking to the neighbor's house may require a passport or a visa, and an errant kick of a soccer ball has the potential of someday starting an international incident.
There's no cheering crowd on the main pitch in Kostajnica, Bosnia-Herzegovina. No TV coverage, but this match is an international. Technically, every match played here is, because the pitch is split between Bosnia and Croatia. Players cross into and out of the EU several times per game, and that creates complications. There are no problems on the pitch, but it's true. When the ball goes over the fence, it lands in Croatia. So we get our logistics manager, who always has a passport with him, to go and retrieve the ball. We are trying not to use boys to bring them back, in order to avoid problems. God forbid, someone could arrest them on the other side. A little while later, a boy is the closest to an errant ball. He fetches it without any problems, but others have found themselves in trouble after crossing the border. And it's not just the footballers. This farmer's land is split between the two countries. He's been arrested twice and fined just from going about his work. I was just crossing into my land, like I've always crossed it. Supposedly, the border is around here. You see this little creek, but nobody really knows exactly. There are no guards in sight in 2016, no checkpoints. But these players are reminded of the breakup of Yugoslavia every time they lose a football.
Well, it was a gala night for Germany at Monday's 44th International Emmy Awards in New York. Germans took home 3 prizes, including the prestigious Best Drama, which was awarded to Deutschland 83. It's the story of an East German spy who infiltrates the West German army. Christiana Paul also garnered the Best Actress Award for her performance in Under the Radar. She plays a judge whose life is upended when her daughter is accused of carrying out a bombing in Berlin. Okay, a reminder of the top stories we're following for you at this hour. A proposed child marriage law that sparked violent protests in Turkey has been withdrawn by the government. Opponents say it would have pardoned rape and jeopardized efforts to combat child marriages. And President-elect Donald Trump says he will pull the U.S. out of a planned free trade deal with Asia-Pacific countries on his first day in office. He called the pact a potential disaster for America. You're watching DW. We're back in half an hour. Stay with us.